Sudan has been divided by war for centuries. The Arab North preyed on the black Christian South. In the early 80s, oil was discovered. The war intensified. Finally, after 6 decades of war, both sides realized they needed to find peace to take advantage of the black gold. In July of 2011, South Sudan finally achieved its own independence and became the world's newest nation. The majority Dinka tribe was represented by former military commander and now president Salva Kiir Mayardit. The second largest group, the Nuer, was represented by Dr. Riek Machar Teni, who was appointed vice president. Things were looking up for South Sudan. It now had an official government. It was at peace with its northern neighbor. And both had planned to capitalize on the expected flow of oil and other natural resources. But on December 15th, 2013, everything fell apart.
Fighting in South Sudan has spread outside the capital Juba after a reported coup attempt at the weekend. President Salva Kiir has accused his former vice president of orchestrating the fighting.
I promise you today that justice will prevail.
The coup attempt is said to have started within the Presidential Guard. After the fight, Dinka soldiers and a militia called the Gelwang targeted Nuer soldiers and Nuer civilians. Soon, over 1,000 people were dead, mostly Nuer. The next day, President Salva Kiir sent soldiers in a tank over to Riek Machar's house. Luckily, Dr. Machar and his wife Angelina had escaped the night before. To the outside world, it just seemed like another violent speed bump on the road to prosperity. Except I knew that Dr. Riek Machar was planning to fight back. And I knew he was going to fight back in a way that would thrust South Sudan into another civil war. But I needed to find this all out for myself. I needed to find Dr. Riek Machar and get his side of the story. So I teamed up with photojournalist and filmmaker Tim Fresia. To help facilitate our journey into the bush, I invited friend Mashat Lap Thiep, former Lost Boy and Nuer child soldier, to return to his homeland in South Sudan.
So what are you shopping for?
Shopping for the trip.
Today, Mashat is an American citizen. 18 years ago, he was a Lost Boy, selected from a Kenyan refugee camp to come to the U.S., where he now works as a manager of a Costco in Seattle. He has been trying to use his education and good luck to help his countrymen ever since.
This is so good. Hey, I want that picture, man. I gotta send it to Costco people.
Mashat would be our guide to the world of the rebels, the world of the Nuer, and our key to finding Dr. Riek Machar. The only catch is that nobody in Kenya wanted to fly us into rebel-held territory. Flying into a war zone, of course, is a risky and expensive proposition. So we wasted 2 weeks in Nairobi before finding a pilot who would take that risk. We had to convince this pilot to drop us into a place where there were no outsiders, no fuel, no food, and no law.
Could you give me a receipt?
I can give you a receipt for my bit.
Yeah.
Mashat didn't seem bothered by this predicament. He was beaming with optimistic intentions. Finally excited that as a former victim of his homeland's brutality, he might be able to save South Sudan. South Sudan is a hard country, a place resilient to change. Mashat had no idea what he would do to save South Sudan, and I was just the latest in a long list of crazy white men who were fascinated by this hard and brutal place. When we landed, we were told we had 4 minutes to get our stuff out, and the pilot wasn't even going to stop the engines. Once on the ground, we met up with a group of Nuer soldiers. After a brief negotiation, they agreed to drive us the 100 miles to Kobo. So, Mashat, are you happy to be back?
Yep, I'm happy to be back.
Although it might be a little concerning to enter a world with no food or method of getting food, the lifestyles of the Nuer are firmly rooted to the land. Food was everywhere. That is, if you were a good enough shot. Finally, we catch dinner, and Mashat is giddy thinking about the old days. Long before meat was sold neatly packaged in plastic. Tired, and after a full day of driving, we arrive in Akowo. Despite Mashat's humble origins as a young cattle herder, he likes to stay clean. Maybe too clean.
I want to wipe my hand with my face, but this thing is made of the same thing.
Go away.
I watch
Whiny, complaining.
You're such a princess.
Bring your own shit.
Are you ready for our morning fight?
Yeah, it's time. It's time.
This place you don't fight, man.
In this place, we don't fight.
Travel in South Sudan is the lucky combination of stumbling on a looted truck, making sure it's hot-wired, and then finding someone to sell you fuel at around $20 a gallon. Once on your way, you cling on for dear life while an ever-increasing number of soldiers crowd on top. We arrive at the newer SPLA resistance camp. Since the Juba massacre last December, camps like this have served as headquarters for Riek Machar as he plans his attacks against the government of Salva Kiir.
It's a part of Akoba. There's many people live around here, including their leader, Dr. Riek. There's a lot of refugees out here. There's people coming back where they get destroyed. They just move up here. Well, this is safe. This place is safe for them. That's why they come over here. Okay. Those are the church people.
Life here is always centered around water. The rivers provide fish and attract the animals. As the dry season continues, the rivers shrink. In the wet season, the rivers expand, turning the area into a vast swamp. Finally, after dozens of calls made on our sat phones, we are summoned to meet with Dr. Riek Machar. Machar, along with his London-educated wife Angelina, are getting by the best they can. This is their first video interview since they fled Juba.
Well, I'm Riek Machar Teng. I never expected to go back to bush and to fight again. We plan no coup, we plan no rebellion.
You know, the world calls it rebels, rebellions, and so on and so forth. He's not a rebel. We did not rebel against anything. We were pushed out of our home because of fear for our life.
We wanted reform. I said I was going to contest presidential elections, but because he knew he was going to lose the presidential elections, he created this conflict.
No matter what the differences were going to be or the issues, in my mind, they would be addressed through dialogue, through democratic processes, not this.
The wrath of Salva Kiir is now being expressed on the ground.
It's a country in crisis, serious crisis. And that's why I was saying I'm hopeful that we will, and I'm confident, because if we don't move upwards and we move downward, it will be worse than Somalia.
Salva Kiir needs to account for the ethnic cleansing that happened in Juba. You know, he needs to account for that.
Despite the circumstances of their exile, the calm, perhaps conciliatory words of Dr. Riek Machar and his wife don't provide an accurate picture of what is about to occur. What was about to happen was something that has its roots in newer culture, history, and mythology. Something that has dark origins in another time.
Commander Riek Machar is 38 and has a doctorate in engineering from Bradford University. His tribe, the Nuer, regard him as a savior, someone they'd been told to expect by a 19th century prophet.
In 1991, Dr. Riek Machar, frustrated with how things were going in the war against the North, made the decision to split from Dinka leader John Garang.
They will be known in history as people who stabbed the movement in southern Sudan in the back.
Mashar's rash decision to pit his newer tribesmen against Garang's Dinka plunged the South into a decade-long bloodbath. One incident in particular was the 1991 Boer massacre, in which Dr. Riek Mashar's White Army killed over 3,000 Dinka civilians. This incident could not have been far from President Salva Kiir's mind when he addressed the country last December.
And will not allow the incidences of 1991 to repeat themselves again.
Which begs the question of whether this is all just history repeating itself.
My President Salva Kiir has been corrupted by power. He wanted to create a dictatorship. We want to create a democracy.
Garang didn't like semblance of institutions, of structures, of democracy.
Exhausted by 10 years of warfare and mass starvation, in 2002, Garang and Machar settled their differences.
Survival itself is nothing else. Will force us to implement this government.
Here was Machar 20 years later, divorced from the government again, leading a bush war against the Dinka again, searching for sponsors. Machar knew that the rainy season was coming, and just like the famine that had rocked Somalia, Sudan, and Ethiopia in the mid-'80s, this recent conflict in South Sudan was going to trigger something much worse than just violence. For now, people could hunt because the animals came to the water. They could fish because the rivers were low. But in a few weeks, as the wet season approaches, this would all change. Ashat had seen all this before. He was here when the Nuer were starving. He was a child soldier fighting an ugly war with his brothers the Dinka. He didn't want to think about that now. He had come here to save South Sudan.
Well, you've been living in Seattle, you go to McDonald's, and now you come here. But these are your people, and this is where you're from. Do you feel like you're part of this, or do you feel like you're part of that?
Well, I feel in between. I see my people dying with nothing to eat. This is just not good. I don't even feel like, going back because I know it will be in my mind every day.
Without flies, we'd be lonely. When they come to visit us.
Salva has been talking loudly about corruption, but I believe that he is the center of the corruption itself. And to prove it, I commissioned the World Bank program called STAR, which restores stolen property. They conducted a forensic accounting on over 2,000 contracts, actually, on grain reserve when it was availed to the public. The people who were engaged in the process were predominantly from the state Salva Kiir comes from, very close people to him. Actually, a day before I was dismissed, I had asked the Minister of Finance through the World Bank to do another forensic accounting in the road contracts. The Minister of Justice was asked to prosecute those who were involved. The minister who was jailed.
After tracking down elusive rebel leader, Dr. Riek Machar, it now becomes clear that South Sudan is at war. Machar and Tim have their own little war going on.
These people have people. You can't just fuck them around. You're talking shit all day. Don't take a picture here.
The bickering that began in Kenya has become nearly constant.
It's not this motherfucker.
As we move towards the real conflict.
What's he doing?
Run.
I'm just telling you.
The former vice president tells us that if we want to see real fighting, we should go to Malakal, and we should get there quickly. To do that, we need to travel upriver from Akobo to Nasser by boat. Once we link up with the locals in Nasser, we will need to find a vehicle and fuel to get up to the front lines.
You stole my spot.
This is the Sud, one of the largest natural swamps on Earth. The same area that frustrated Arab slavers for centuries and preserved the newer way of life. Mother Nature is the only real commander here. In a few weeks, the rainy season will begin, and the land will become an impassable swamp.
Well, we spent all day wasting our time trying to get fuel. Now we've made it about 2 miles up the river, and we're sitting in a swamp of hyacinth or something similar, and we're sitting here like the birds wondering what to do next.
The Sud is also the native homeland of the Nuer. Although the Nuer have existed for centuries unchanged, their lives depend on planting crops, herding their cattle, and most of all, free movement. But because of the recent violence, that's all about to change. It is now the dry season, and the horizon is full of fire. The fires are lit by farmers so that their cattle can get to the green grass below. As we approach the fighting, it feels like we are descending into hell. Our 5-hour boat ride on a tributary of the White Nile has now lasted 8 hours, and we are still nowhere near Nasser. As darkness falls, the soldiers and the boatmen have only one thing on their mind: food. We disembark. Fires are lit, dried catfish are tossed in pots, and the soldiers stuff themselves.
Is it good?
It's good.
Yeah.
You don't eat feet?
No.
Early in the morning, we pull into Nasser. Realizing that his job is now done, our boatman begins hustling us for more money. Not because he needs it, but because he wants it. But everyone's a businessman here. Even the young ones will find a reason to make another dollar.
Okay, so how much to take our stuff to the place? What? I can't hear. Oh, 20.
Yeah. That's too much, right?
Too much.
Although all foreigners and outsiders have been evacuated from Nasser, we find all the comforts of home in an abandoned NGO facility. They've even left the internet on, and so we settle down to a life on faux safari.
Please shut it off, please.
Walk away.
Shut it off.
Walk away.
Shut the film off.
Go away.
Shut the film off.
You can't control your anger.
No.
Once again, Mashat becomes impatient with how slow everything's going. He's under constant pressure from the locals who want to bilk our money. He's caught between two worlds. He came here to save these people, and all they want to do is rip us off. It's causing him to flip out.
How are you feeling? You look worn out.
Yeah, just because everything here is just off, you know.
Finding vehicles that haven't been stripped is a problem in this looted and destitute land. Thankfully, we are approached by a journalist who wants to split the cost of gas to get up to the front lines in Malakal. Malakal is a major port on the Nile River. Whoever controls Malakal can not only block barge traffic upriver to the capital of Juba, but can also launch attacks into the last oil-producing areas further down the river. Dr. Riek Machar has hinted at an impending attack in Malakal by the mysterious White Army. The White Army is a ragged group of tribal killers who are only unleashed by prophecy. And Mashat has told us that Malakal is where the prophet has said to attack.
Did you get the bushmeat now?
What do you mean did I get bushmeat? Of course I ate bushmeat.
When?
The camp.
See me come in here, we didn't get the bushmeat.
You didn't see me shooting at the envelope, Turner?
I know, you where's the bullet?
No, they were too lazy to go get all the dead envelope.
It was about 6 bullets without getting nothing.
No, you see the...
Dinka and Nuer live side by side in much of the country, but the recent attacks by Dinka against Nuer in Juba have set off ethnic cleansing all around the country. We pass numerous burned and looted Dinka villages as we get closer to Malakal on the White Nile. Then we see trucks speeding towards us. These are our first glimpse of the fabled White Army. They appear to be bringing out their wounded from Malakal.
Looks like they're trying to get to the side.
We find the general in charge of the White Army in an abandoned roadside construction camp. The general is pleased to see us, as he has just returned from the front lines after retaking Malakal.
So what is the condition inside Malakal? Are there civilians inside?
There are no civilians inside Malakal. The government has killed many civilians.
So are there any prisoners from the government side that surrendered?
No, up to now there are no prisoners. We have captured.
Is the White Army under the direct control of Dr. Riek Machar, or is it operating independently?
The Upper Nile Command is under Riek Machar. I'm now the commander of the Upper Nile zones. All the Nuer White Army are under me, and they are under Riek Machar because they are Nuers. They are fighting the cause because their children and their mothers, their brothers were killed by self-defeating Juba. So they have the right to fight along the way to liberate what happened in Juba.
War is the way now.
Yeah, war must be the way because the dictator doesn't want to resign, doesn't want to step down. So there's no alternative unless we fight. So the war is going to be a solution for Salva Kiir to go out from the seat.
So right now things are calm in Malakal?
Yeah, Malakal.
Okay.
Everything is calm in Malakal. Even you people tomorrow you want to go to Malakal, you can go.
Okay.
There's no problem.
At last, we see the White Army up close. They fight because they are told to by a prophet. Dr. Riek Machar pays them nothing except for what they can carry out of the chaos. And if they're lucky to live, they can keep their weapon. The White Army is a collection of small fighting units, each with a completely different view of the fighting. Some insist that they are winning. Some are mad because there was no backup. And some, they just hope they don't bleed to death. There was no medical help or supplies here. The wounded will have to be driven back to a crude hospital 6 hours away in Nasser. To Mashat, this is all quite upsetting. This is why he left South Sudan for a better life in the U.S.
Where did you learn your military skills from, your strategy skills?
Well, during the liberation struggle, I went to the first group.
U.S. Special Forces?
Yes.
So the Americans taught you strategy and tactics?
Here we are.
After our initial encounter with the White Army, we had returned to Nasser at nightfall because our driver got a call from his boss. He said it was too dangerous to stick around. Back in Nasser, we find another vehicle to get us back up into the fight.
Titanic. Swapping deck chairs on the Titanic.
How these young drivers came about owning these new Toyotas soon becomes clear.
It's a nice truck.
Oh, you killed the owner.
You kill the owner.
Just before entering Malakal, we are each issued a red headband. This is to prevent us from being shot, or so they say.
Always wanted to join the rebels.
The trickle of people we first saw fleeing Malakal now becomes a stream as civilians and soldiers head south towards Nasser. We are also passed by more members of the White Army streaming in to join the fight. The newer men who made up the White Army were estimated at about 30,000 strong, an incredibly large force considering there are no logistics, no supply, and not even water in a town of 125,000 people. As we enter Malakal, we pass medieval-style encampments. Each group is piling up their plunder. Rebels are driving stolen aid vehicles. The hallmarks of rape, murder, and other atrocities are evident everywhere we look. fighters walk about aimlessly, looking for food, more loot, or more revenge. We finally meet up with the general. His headquarters is a mud house surrounded by terrified women and children.
Hello, General. Good to see you again.
Welcome, you sit.
The general who assured us before that all was calm is now assuring us again, in the middle of all this wanton violence and chaos, that Uganda will pay $50,000 for every Nuer their troops have killed. Surprisingly, he also insists that any contract with Western companies will be canceled because they are corrupt.
This is the end of it. This is the end of the contracts. Okay? We are going to make our own deal with our own companies that we have the interest in. Yeah. Now you have the newer White Army. Okay? You have the newer SPLA. Okay? You have the newer police. No, the Dinka they don't have Dinka White Army. Where is the Dinka White Army of Salva Kiir Mayardit? It is now the White Army who are fighting them.
What about the Gelwang or something? They have a Gelwang?
Gelwang?
Yeah.
This Gelwang has been killed.
Oh.
Yes. They were brought here, they are all killed. Gelwang or whatever Gelwang, they are all killed here. Huh? Gelwang is not working.
The general may have been in charge inside that hut, but outside, chaos reigned. Before fighting broke out, the population of Malakal was about 125,000. Now, the only civilians we can see are either shell-shocked or corpses. The White Army had scoured the city like termites, decimating its inhabitants, burning their homes in what seemed to be an indiscriminate fashion. Despite the lack of money, food, or water, the army subsisted on violence. Not wanting to be seen as an ungracious host amongst the pilfering and slaughter of humans, the general offered to show us around Malakal. The general stopped to chat up a group of the White Army. What he thought was a good photo op for us turned into an angry demand for food, water, and medical help, as well as adding to the overall confusion.
Hey, what do you want to say?
What do you say?
What was supposed to be a victory lap for the general turned out to be an embarrassing reality check. Malakal had been won and lost before. After it would be retaken and lost again. Most of the fighters had taken their revenge. They had their loot, they had found their families, and they just wanted to go home. Some were eager to move forward to Rink and Malut, South Sudan's main oil centers, and the primary source of income for President Salva Kiir's government.
We are banning this thing for the reason because the enemies find themselves in the house.
This is my country, Malakal.
You know, and we are going toward Rang and Malut. We will go very soon.
And they're shooting at you?
They are shooting on us. When we are coming on the road, they are shooting on us. That is why we are banning this house. We don't need any government side or self-proclaimed is people in upper now.
Yes, sir. You don't have anything again. Okay?
Some people think we are too young for democracy. We are not too young for democracy. I don't buy that. The West sometimes think Africa needs to wait till it develops so that democracy can be established. That sometimes the West supports dictatorship with assumption that dictatorship brings stability. Doesn't.
Just a little bit chaos. Just nervous because I don't see people organized. When you don't know what's going on, people just running back and forth. If you don't have, nothing to, these people, they have nothing to lose.
Wife be upset if she heard all the guns firing and saw the dead bodies?
I know she'd be upset. Yeah, last night when I was talking to her, she's like, don't go there. I said, well, I'm going with Robert and be okay.
leave, you know. You look like now everybody's shooting, so, yeah.
Mashat was doing his best to explain what was going on. This was war, after all. These were his people. This was his country. But how the hell was he going to fix this? His hopes and dreams for his homeland dashed. And it wasn't like the rebels or the White Army were going to stick around and save South Sudan either. Most of the rebels had pulled their families out of the UN camps and headed into the bush. About a month after our departure from Malakal, the White Army would be summoned again to do their ugly business in the oil centers of Rink, Nalut, and Bentiu. I had brought Mashat here because he genuinely wanted to save South Sudan. His hard life of being a child soldier, a refugee, and a lost boy had given him motivation to come back to prevent others from experiencing his fate. What he saw was a new nation moving from peaceful prosperity, being plunged into civil war. Going back over the rhetoric of Dr. Riak Machar and his wife Angelina about the need for political dialogue, the horrors we had witnessed here over the last few days made all of their polite conversations seem like lip service.
Mashat, the peace bringer.
It was apparent that despite untold promises of peace, wealth, and stability, South Sudan had failed. Mashat left the front lines defeated, disenchantment taking hold as he realized he would not be saving South Sudan. South Sudan had once again reverted to its natural state, a harsh reality of hand-to-mouth living, a never-ending search for sustenance in a world virtually unchanged since the very first outsiders came to save South Sudan.
A report released by the UN in early May is the first in-depth examination of the violent ethnic civil strife that is tearing apart South Sudan. It states that thousands have been killed and more than 1 million South Sudanese have been displaced. 6.9 million people in the region are facing the threat of mass starvation.
So many people, I cannot count, and I cannot see the starting point, and I cannot see the ending point. I never see that much of people in my life.